Today we're filming this episode at my estate in Weston, Pennsylvania. And our guests are Steve Mira, Travis Walton, and our co-host Fred Saluga. And today we're going to talk about anniversaries of the year 2018. Welcome to the show. Okay guys, let's talk about anniversaries having to do ending in 8s. Okay? So 200 years ago was Frankenstein in 1818, when 3 people got together on a rainy evening and decided to have a contest to write the scariest story. And Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, but because she was a female, she couldn't publish it under her name. She put it under her husband, Lord Percy, and that's how it was published. Now, interestingly, I actually went to buy an old copy of Frankenstein, but I asked for the 3rd edition. The 3rd edition, after her husband passed away, is in her name, and it has the drawings of the Frankenstein monster. So the 3rd edition's worth more than the 1st edition. And when I went to a rare bookstore in Vegas, they looked it up. $13,000.
Wow.
So I don't think I'm going to buy that unless I go to a garage sale and find somebody with an original.
Well, how many in that printing?
I don't even know how many there are.
Probably not a lot.
Half a dozen or something. There's not a whole lot of them. And for our viewers, this segment on anniversaries will appear in Phenomena magazine that Steve Mira operates, publishes. Will be the January issue of 2018. So let's continue with our anniversaries and now go to 100 years ago. And 100 years ago, and this is interesting, there was the Spanish flu in 1918, which killed over 50 million people. And there are some people who say that there were viruses brought in from space. And there are some people who say that the Fatima sighting in Portugal in 1917 was a UFO encounter and brought this virus to Earth. And Dr. Bob Woods wrote a book on alien viruses, so it's very possible.
It's very feasible. We do know that we may have spores in space. There's still a lot of work that's been involved in the theory of panspermia, where there could be bacterial life forms in space, and of course these could be dropping to Earth on a regular basis, and some of them obviously affect us more so than others.
I wonder, is it deliberate though? And they can't seem to wipe us out, because some people say if you have the theory of creation, you have the theory of evolution, then you have the genetic engineering where we have the DNA of 2 species. So they're trying to wipe out the human, but it's not wiping us out because we have 2 DNA in us.
Yeah. But how many times was the world wiped out that we don't even know
Well, it's
about?
never actually wiped. Oh, you mean you're talking about asteroid strikes and stuff like that? But
What was them?
Yeah, you had the Black Plague, you had the bubonic plague, and etc. And there are people who say that maybe those plagues are really brought in from space, either on meteors or UFOs.
It's very feasible. I mean, influenza is probably one of the most, difficult diseases to deal, illnesses to deal with.
Yep.
It's very resilient.
Okay, also in 1918, and this is a whole interesting story that we did an episode on, was Aleister Crowley in 1918. He did a satanic ritual, he conjured up a gray. And it's the first time the gray has ever been sketched or drawn. It had the name of Lam, L-A-M, but it's so interesting that the first gray was seen in a satanic ritual.
Yes.
And there's a whole storyline from that where Aleister Crowley then went from the UK to the United States, and in 1942 he hooked up with Jack Parsons, who founded JPL Labs. Some people say that's Jack Parsons Labs. Ray Bradbury, the writer, was his student, and L. Ron Hubbard, who founded Scientology. I mean, it's amazing the people of synchronicity
it really
there.
is. I mean, there may be a little bit more than just synchronicity here.
And at that point, the FBI was investigating Crowley because they were concerned about the satanic rituals and any murders and that type of stuff that was done because of that. So they're investigating him. And
of course, it's not the first time that an alien or a grey has been seen in association to paranormal experiments, such as the skull experiment had exactly the same thing. We had an entity that was seen, we referred to as blue. It was like an alien grey looking thing. And again, that was more paranormally orientated
Yeah.
as opposed to ufological.
Again, the gray comes up in a paranormal, seance type situation. It's amazing. But what happened then in '52, the CIA takes over the investigation of Crowley, and they form a group called the Collins Elite. And the Collins Elite investigates UFOs and the paranormal.
Yeah.
And amazingly, their conclusion is there are no UFOs. It's all paranormal and interdimensional and falls under occult and not extraterrestrial.
Well, I mean, considering the time when this was done, the Collins Elite and their conclusions, if you actually look at what we're dealing with as a phenomena today, it seems to fall very much so into that category, doesn't it?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
It's very
But-
paranormally orientated, the UFO subject.
Except for that physical abduction that took place in '75, in '73, and a handful of others. But that other type that's in the corner of your bedroom at night with the gray and you go into an altered state, to me, that's an interdimensional, malevolent entity. And I don't believe they're from space.
It's
They
really-
may be. They may
I
be.
mean, it's really how much we want to really underline that word paranormal and what does it
And
really
get-
mean, because
yeah.
it just so encompasses so much, doesn't
Yep.
it?
And now, Travis, yours was yours always physical, or was there any part of it that was altered state, out of body?
It's a physical event,
Yeah.
and I think that sometimes people reach a little far trying to explain it away as a physical entity, and the attempts to discredit the whole idea as being nothing at all is. Pushes in that direction. It's a figment of somebody's imagination. It's mass hysteria, or government mind control experiments. Anything rather than a simple journey of living beings from other bodies that we know exist out there.
We seen a gray down at Saltport. We was down there doing some Bigfoot research one day,
How long ago was that?
about 5 years ago. And it snowed that night, and I was with a guy, his wife, his kid, and niece, and they was staying at one of the places down there, and he said, well, just stay here tonight at the lodge. He said, because it's going to snow real bad, sleep on the couch. So I said, okay, and turned around and looked. I seen a gray standing at the door. It was a glass door, about 4 foot tall, and I looked at it for about 3 minutes. I'm looking like, what the? And he asked me, he said, what are you looking at? And I didn't say nothing. So he come walking in and said, Jesus, that's a damn gray.
Did he see it too?
He's seen it,
Yeah.
his wife's seen it, his son's seen it, and his niece seen it. And the thing just vanished.
Well, I think the term gray is a kind of a recent thing. I don't think they have that back in
Right.
1975. And it's probably a kind of a categorization. In other words, I think there's probably a number of species that fit that general description that get lumped together that are possibly, from completely different origins.
Nick Redfern keeps telling me, don't try to find one explanation. It's probably a combination of multiple things.
Yeah.
But my
Very much so, yeah.
career was head of security, and if I had a criminal, I had to find him. I had to solve every case. I couldn't say, oh, well. so I
could be
try to
both.
make it one thing, but it's probably more.
It could be a combination.
Yeah.
It could be both. I mean, if we look at such as the subject of remote viewing,
Yeah.
we have remote viewers that can sort of go to, travel and look at things and pass information backwards and forwards in a psychic or, that type of state.
Right.
However, if we take the viewer himself in a physical process to that location, then there's two different methods of that
Right,
communication. One's a psychic method, such as it could be fall under the paranormal.
Yeah.
One's a physical one, just maybe like Travis's.
And that's what makes this subject so
what else
interesting.
is interesting about this? Okay. When was it? When did this 50-something or
52.
40? Okay. Before that, what were the aliens? What did they look like?
They changed appearance to fit the society they were in.
Right. So why did the
In
gray come
India,
along?
yeah.
I mean, he fit that society. I mean, before we had little people and this and that, and all of a sudden you got grays.
Well, one of the things that
Yes.
Crowley said was when he did the ritual in 1918, he said he opened up a portal. And one of the other things is Jack Parsons also did a ritual, I believe in 52, and he conjured up a female. He again said his ritual was more intense and opened up a bigger portal or expanded that one. And Parsons ended up then dying in an explosion in his laboratory as he was trying to conjure up and use chemicals and spells and all of that. But let's move forward on this. We know then from that CIA group and the Collins elite, they then went into MK Ultra, right? Using drugs and everything. Here's something interesting. In 1969, that Collins elite group and the CIA formed Operation Orphan. And you can look this up. Operation Orphan was a project to harness demonic power and use it as a weapon, whether it's remote viewing or they could actually target leaders. And they tried to do that with Saddam Hussein.
Yes.
They used this group to use their powers against other countries.
It becomes some type of psychic warfare.
Yeah, psychic warfare. And then the NSA got into it also. And their version of the Collins elite investigating the unknown was called the Jason Society. And there are those, Fred, who say that more of what we're seeing, the UFO is real, the paranormal is real, but more of what we're seeing is actually the CIA and the Air Force here, the NSA and the Navy here.
Right.
They both have these programs, the Jason Society, the Collins Elite, and they also have their own, like Area 51 falls under the CIA.
Yeah.
It's not the Air Force, it's the CIA, but they work together. So it's really the Navy NSA versus the CIA Air Force, and they're competing with each other. And most of the sightings, a lot of them, is our aircraft. Is basically what's being seen. This thing just gets deeper and deeper and
Well,
tangled.
government institutions around the world have invested millions and millions in mind control. And so that's just a whole nother
And it's true.
avenue of explaining
Well, you
things.
look at my
It's
labs.
true. My labs. Then you get into that. It's
yeah.
unbelievable. All right, let's stick with 1918. We still got 100 years to go, and we only got about 40 minutes here. But March 4th is an interesting case. March 4th of 1918, the largest U.S. naval ship ever to disappear, the USS Cyclops, with 306 crew members, totally vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. And they got the German records from World War I. And there was no record of them taking credit for sinking the Cyclops. It was a 19,360-ton ship that just vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. So let's go 80 years ago, and this is really interesting. When we did the 2014 MUFON Symposium, I set the theme UFOs and media, and it's funny how we didn't talk, but there were 4 of us who presented on UFOs in the media, and we all targeted the 1938 panic broadcast as the most significant event in UFO history.
Yeah.
Not Roswell. It was this because it started the non-disclosure of UFOs. When they did the panic broadcast Halloween, October 31st, 1938, with Orson Welles, the reaction of panic to Martians landing here told the government that people were not ready for the truth. And in 1960, the Brookings Institute did a study called The Implications of Extraterrestrial Contact. They referenced the panic broadcast and said not to disclose the truth because people can't handle the truth. They took the panic broadcast from 38. In Chile, they did their version of it in 1944. Ecuador did their version in 1949. Both of them resulted in people panicking and running. I don't know where you're going to hide from aliens.
It's a great way to obtain statistics for like a survey. In a sense.
Well, this
It's a
was
reaction.
this was the reaction. But so here's my question briefly to you three. That was 1938, 80 years ago. With television and everything and electronics, do you think people can handle the truth that UFOs and aliens
No.
from space are real? Do you think they
No.
can handle it, or do you think that society collapses?
I think society collapse. I think there's some people out there can, but I don't think the majority can.
Well, you got to remember that us that do this is one of the smallest minority
We're a
groups out
minority.
there.
Yeah.
Even the TV shows out there, they're only getting 1% of the viewership. I mean, The Walking Dead gets a 14% of the viewership, and the Hangar One show got 1.5, which was considered good. So we're a minority.
Well-
Do you think people can handle the truth on
Not
that
yet, but
UFOs are
I
real?
think the mission of organizations like MUFON and my own personal mission is to get people into a position where they are more ready to accept the truth, and that's going to be gradual and necessarily so.
But is it
and incremental?
Is it about the truth though? I mean, really, the bottom line is that how will society? It's okay
React.
us knowing about this, but what's the impact
Yeah.
on society in regards education, in regards economy, in regards religion? I think these are the principal pillars of society. And once we start rattling them, then we're having problems.
But you have the fireman's book, the one chapter, whatever it is.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, actually.
Yeah, but
Leave
you
that
got-
in the
when you're
timeline.
talking about the panic thing here, they have a whole section
With the warning.
Oh, they know how
panic
to
thing.
deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's
we'll get to that in a
possible for
second.
this open acknowledgement to create disruption without it necessarily being interpreted as invading monsters. Even if you view alien technology as a benevolent gift from an advanced civilization, it's still potentially extremely disruptive, and it requires a great degree of preparation on the part of the public.
Yeah, well, it was the movie industry that made the monsters because
Yeah.
it sold movies.
I think information like that could cause even further segregation between cultures and societies. I mean, it's bad as it is now, but
Yeah.
I think such information like that, societies are going to take it, cultures are going to take that and make it of what they want to fit it.
Yeah.
I'd say the fact that we're still here is evidence that they have no such intentions.
Yeah.
Because if they did, we'd never know what hit us. The idea that a flu virus epidemic was a failed attempt at getting rid of humans, I seriously doubt that. I think that if they wanted to, they'd succeed.
Well, they're only taking as many
So-
as they need.
Well,
They're only so hungry.
Selective.
They're only so hungry.
I say it's evidence that they have no such intention.
But see, on the same token, then, if you have cattle mutilation, now it could be a couple things doing it. But if it is aliens, what are they doing? I mean, why
That's
do
the
they need-
forerunner
why do they
of
need
human
blood?
mutilation.
Well, don't you
Mutilation.
think there's something prejudicial in
Yeah.
the terminology mutilation? You could call it a dissection.
Yeah, it would be
And
nice.
That's a little bit more neutral
Yeah.
term.
All right, let's move
Mutilation
forward.
sounds pretty aggressive.
Okay.
All right, 70 years ago, you have the famous Captain Thomas Mantell case, January 7th, 1948, where his plane crashed. There was no blood in the scene where the crash was. There was very little damage as the plane actually belly flopped down in Kentucky. His body was not shown to the family. What they say, I don't know if this is true, was buried in a lead casket. And his last broadcast, he says, it appears to be a metallic object, tremendous in size, directly ahead and slightly above. I'm trying to get closer for a better look.
I mean,
Also-
that was a fascinating case. There were references, possible references, that the aircraft was somehow pelleted, had microscopic holes all over it.
Right.
Very interesting. And there's pictures of the craft out there. It did not disintegrate like 9/11, the craft out here in Somerset. Also in 1948, the Air Technical Intelligence Group of Project Sign did their look at UFOs, and they concluded UFOs were interplanetary in origin. Air Force Chief Hoyt Vandenberg rejected the report, ordered it burned. I know there's a few people in the field who claims they saw it or there were more than one copy of it. I've never seen that actual copy. They then went on to suppress 300 UFO reports after 1948 due to national security reasons. When members of Project Sign refused to change their conclusion, the group was dissolved and they formed a new group called Project Grudge under the Air Force, because the Air Force did not want to take it, and it was a grudge. They didn't want to do it. I think they actually wanted the Navy to take it. Here's an interesting one, and this is, like I say, sometimes somebody should make movies out of this, like, Amazing Stories, where each segment is one show. Well, here's one that would be a great episode to a sci-fi or a UFO type show. March of 1948, there's a UFO crash in Aztec, New Mexico. And this one, it wasn't a crash. The military was able to shoot it down. It was a controlled landing, no damage, 16 alien bodies recovered. And it was taken to Hangar 18 in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base over by Cincinnati. So what happens is that Frank Scully, he ends up writing a book on it called Behind the Flying Saucers, which is really interesting. But Frank Scully is a writer for Variety. He's a Hollywood reporter. He gets approached by Linda Darnell, an actress, tells him the story. Now think about it. This is like Angelina Jolie going to Anderson Cooper, telling him the story, and he goes and investigates it. That's what happened back then in 1948. So Scully knows the two people involved, or at least one of them, oil man Silas Newton and scientist Leo Gebauer. Now Gebauer invented a tracking device for Japanese submarines during World War II. So he wasn't like a crackpot. I mean, this is like important. He helped win the war. And Newton is an oil man, worth obviously a lot of money. So Scully writes his book. Canadian scientist Wilbert Smith, who we all know, looking into UFOs, say they're real. He claims he discussed this with Dr. Robert Sarbacker in 1950, and they said Scully's book was correct. Now, what happens is, to discredit Newton, he's charged with fraud in his oil business. There were 19 investors. They all made money. One complained and said he didn't make what he should have and all of that, and they charged Newton with fraud. And that kind of like took Newton out at that point and discredited the whole thing. But you got to wonder, was that person put up to it, or was it really? Was it they made money? So what are they complaining about? You know,
I mean, the government, I tell you what, they lie and they'll do things just to get what they want. They don't care about nobody else.
It's the ends justifies the means. Okay, let's go to 1958 now. 60 years ago. So I was born in 57, so we're in 1958 right now. Major Kehoe goes on CBS to discuss UFOs. And he was given a script to use, which he didn't. He said he was going to from the Air Force, but he didn't. And when he said UFOs are under intelligent control, they pulled the live feed and the show went off the air. That was 1958. Also in 58, the Air Force admitted that they scrambled bombers to be launched against Russia based on UFOs that were picked up on radar. And that's why Kennedy said he wanted to share information 5 years later with Khrushchev. They were afraid of a war breaking out over UFOs, thinking that their missiles coming in at you know.
But I think they had something during the 60s like that, where both Russia and the United States was ready to start.
Yeah, it wasn't the first time.
I mean, they couldn't determine if it was something coming from Russia or if it was something coming from America.
Yeah.
You know, and it caused probably quite a number of concerns.
Yeah. So then in 58 also, DARPA was created with the goal of engineering advanced technology. So what advanced technologies did we have in 58 unless they were coming from UFOs? It's kind of interesting how these government agencies are formed, and they're formed around some UFO incidents too. So now let's go to 50 years ago. We've talked about this one in Vietnam, June 16th of 1968. U.S. fighters are scrambled because UFOs are picked up. They're chasing the UFO. They fire their missiles at it. The UFO then veers off. The missiles continue. They hit the Australian ship, the USS Hobart, almost deliberately. Now, there are others, and I know we did an episode of Hangar 1 on this, who said that these craft actually take our missiles and redirect them.
No.
I assume they probably got the technology because there was seen to be many cases where they've had the capabilities of are basically arming warheads, initiating them,
Yeah.
or even closing them
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
I mean, so if they can do that, I would assume,
You
can redirect them.
redirecting missiles wouldn't be too much of a problem.
So General George Brown was the commander at that time. He was quoted in 1973 as saying, "UFOs plagued us in Vietnam. We called them helicopters, but the North didn't use helicopters until the end of the war." Now Brown is not disciplined, just like all the other generals during Roswell, etc. He becomes the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's
Yeah.
amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, UFOs have been seen during nearly every war. I mean,
Yeah.
if we go back in time, we can see that UFOs were associated to Alexander the Great and his campaign,
Yep.
and others, as well as not only the First World War, the Second World War with the Foo Fighters,
Yep.
and right up to current. I mean, we had reports of UFOs during the Gulf War.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, also in 68, we have a second congressional hearing on UFOs on July 29th of 1968. So if people, see, back then, and this is what I liked, was this was taken a lot more seriously
Right.
than it is today. Today it's become entertainment. People laugh at you when you bring it up outside of our circle of friends. But back then, UFOs were very serious, and people joined groups. Bobby Kennedy and other people belonged to UFO groups.
But if you read stuff back from the 60s, the 50s, like you got the Saucer Review. Okay, I got all them copies.
Right.
And you read the stuff back there, they tell it like it is. There's no,
Yeah.
There's
There's a huge effort
Yeah.
to try and explain the phenomenon,
Yeah.
not so much
Rather
as
than
it is
cover it
there.
up. Yeah.
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they say exactly what happened, and nobody's covering nothing up. I mean, and then they go on. But today it's, well, we make it look good.
Well, science, that's one of the problems with science too. Well, also you mentioned 1968, the Air Force. The Air Force taught a class for 3 years, from 1968, 69, 70, to their cadets at Colorado Springs. It was a physics class 370. Chapter 33 was on UFOs. Two of my cousins went to the Air Force Academy they went like in 1973, 74. It had already been removed by then.
Oh, right.
I asked them about it. One went on to work for the NSA, the other became a one-star general in the Air Force, and they said at that time that they were there, they did not have that course anymore. But it was taught, and in that course, and I have a copy of it, they said that UFOs have been visiting Earth as long as 47,000 years, and there are 3 or 4 different species. And they gave the examples of some of the best cases, like the Kelly, Kentucky one,
Yeah.
and other cases like that
So
to
it's very
support it.
feasible that they may have already been here for a long, long time. Maybe even before you.
Well, they said 47,000 years, so they're saying in
47,000,
45,000 BC, these UFOs showed. I don't know how they determined that date, something petroglyph, something they found, but they said 47,
Or
not
they-
50, not
Who they
40.
talk to?
I don't, who, or they had a briefing.
Like right now, who's to say that our government, someone made aliens?
Hmm.
I mean, it's very plausible they are aliens. Like
Been
Travis said,
infiltrated.
they would have taken over already. They are taking over. They're taking over inward.
Yes. Yeah,
I
from
mean,
inside.
they actually
Yeah.
can look like us if they want to, or they do look like
Well,
us.
that's what Jacob says, is
Yeah.
they've gone through 7,
Yeah.
8 generations where they're 95% human.
Well, I
and
think a good
past.
question would be for Travis is, when
Yeah.
you saw this human type being on board this craft, if you passed him in the street, do you think he could be recognised as anything?
I think he would pass in the street,
Yeah.
but I don't think the ability to infiltrate necessarily implies some nefarious plot to take over.
Okay. All right. Now, 40 years ago, 1978, and this is a famous case in New Jersey at Fort Dix Army Base, and Major George Filer was there. He was an information officer at the time. He says that an alien was shot, and it went over the fence, whatever, and they found the body dead there. And George Filer, at our conference, I think it was last year or the year before, told the story of how this took place in 1978 in New Jersey. Also in 78, the CIA releases thousands of documents on UFOs. And there's a lot of information obviously found in that. One of the things that were in their documents was their bragging of how they infiltrated NICAP, which was a huge organization with a lot of big name people. Part of it, Major Kehoe, Ruppelt, Hill and Cotter. I mean, these are big name people that were part of it. They bragged as to how they infiltrated it, and they deliberately bankrupted the organization in 1980 by their people taking over, then paying themselves large salaries, large expense accounts, and basically wiping out the organization. But in analyzing it, just like the Kennedy files were just released, people actually go through and analyze this. They found 257 CIA documents and 18 NSA UFO documents withheld because they were numbered.
Exactly the same things happening in the UK.
Held back for national security.
They claim to be transparent and released all the information.
Yeah,
we have our own reports that haven't been released to the public yet, so we know that they're sweeping a few under the rug and they're not releasing them all.
Yep. And what they ended up doing in the following year was a federal appeals court gave the NSA a special dispensation exempting it from Freedom of Information Acts. And the CIA then moved their records to the NSA. Isn't it amazing how it's a shell game is what goes on. Also in 78 in Melbourne, Australia, you got 20-year-old Freddie Valentich, who saw a shiny, elongated object with 4 lights. He said, quote, "It is not an aircraft. It was metallic and it shone a green light on his plane." On the recording in the tower, you can hear a metallic sound. The plane disappears. They never find it. There's no debris. Never found at all. That day, October 21st, 78, there were 15 UFO reports in
And we've had
Australia.
psychologists that have listened over and over these tape recordings, and they've explained that the amount of stress he must have been under because they can tell from the the vocals.
Yeah, his plane disappeared on that one. 1978, this is an interesting story. November 28, 1978, at the United Nations, the Grenada Prime Minister Eric Gary drafted UN Decision 33/426, requesting an agency be established to investigate UFOs. So the UN at this point got involved with UFOs. What happens is 3 months later, there's a military coup in Grenada, and Gary is ousted, and that ended his Grenada initiative. So my question is, was the CIA behind that? Why did that happen to him right when he said he wanted to look at UFOs,
Strange things happen.
Yep. Well, also in 78, Ian Watson publishes Miracle Visitors, and it's the first time the description of the Oz effect or the altered states involved with alien abductions comes into the mainstream. 30 years ago in 88, we have a famous case close to here on Lake Erie where a UFO comes down, it lands on the ice, there are Coast Guard officers brought in, other people witness it, you hear the ice breaking and smaller craft is seen. It almost gave the impression they were trying to go through the ice, maybe to recover another craft that had gotten disabled and now was underneath the ice. But you can actually, and we did for the TV show you can pull up the report on that, and it has what the officers said, the descriptions and everything, but they were restricted by the by NASA to continue any further investigation. So they stopped the Coast Guard from investigating it. It was a good case, and we did that in a show that Richard Lang and I did in Toronto called Close Encounters. That was a TV series that was on for 2 seasons. Also in 88, this is cool, there was alien abduction insurance was issued by a Florida-based UFO abduction insurance company. It cost $19.95.
I remember that.
Yeah, and interestingly, the Heaven's Gate group, remember when they committed suicide because they thought the UFOs were coming? They had taken out a $1 million policy on each of their members against alien abduction because they thought there was going to be an abduction. And that's why they committed suicide, is to not be taken at that time. 1988, there are 3 witnesses at a Lockheed hangar at Norton Air Force Base who claim they see 3 alien reproduction vehicles floating in the hangar as they were doing a tour. The bay door was open and they saw it. 20 years ago in 1998 on CNN, and I remember seeing this on CNN. We were in Baghdad, and CNN showed video of a UFO, and they said it was shot down by the Iraqi military and captured. And this was actually prior to the war, in December 16th of 1998. And there are some people who say we did the invasion of Iraq 5 years later in 2003 to recover this UFO that they had.
That they had.
And we didn't want them to have it to back engineer the technology. 10 years ago, in 2008, Vatican chief astronomer Reverend Gabriel Funes makes his statements that there is very well possible life in space. They would be our space brothers.
Space brothers.
And they most likely have fallen from grace just like us. And interestingly, when I researched it, this was first said by the Vatican spokesman Father Connell in 1957. And then you had Father Balducci in 2001, then Father Funes in 2008.
I don't believe the Pope ever commented on
No,
that, did he?
but he never said anything against it either. He allowed the statement.
He allowed it to go.
Which is a form of approval. And the Vatican has two observatories that they use in Rome and Arizona.
And they have some unusual names, didn't they?
Yeah, Lucifer Project. But you know what? I'm not the most politically correct guy, but I don't think if I was the Vatican, I would call it
I
the
think
Lucifer.
they believed they changed it after a while.
Yeah,
didn't
they called it the Lucy after that, Lucy Project. But 2008, 10 years ago, we were involved in the second part of this. You had the Stevensville case in Texas, and that was over President
very
Bush's
interesting.
Crawford Ranch. It was confirmed on radar. That was in January of 08. Then in the summer of 08, we had a large UFO wave across Pennsylvania. And it ended up as the Bucks County case, where we got radar on the one case and trace evidence on the other case. And in both instances, the FAA tried to discipline the people who assisted MUFON in Stevensville and Bucks County, or they tried to block the investigation. Also that year, the Air Force decided they were no longer going to take UFO reports. They refer callers to NORAD. And again, NORAD is not subject to Freedom of Information Act because it's North American, and Canada and Mexico
It's very cleverly thought. Very cleverly thought.
Oh, they're slick, you know. And there was even the point where Robert Bigelow got involved and said, "I'll take the UFO reports." That was after his involvement trying to fund MUFON's investigations. And the last thing that happened in 08 was the Peters ET Religious Crisis Survey, which is why I asked you guy with the Panic broadcast, what do you think? He concluded that the 7 major religions would not collapse if ET visited Earth.
Okay.
So, and, you know, my opinion is the real believers would cling to the church and say that this is either demonic or this is a challenge to our faith, especially if they're telling you something different. I really don't think that religious people would collapse this. No. I think it's the people without faith, the average person, who panics. Yeah. I think the religious person doesn't panic. It's the non-religious person that probably panics because they don't know what they're dealing with.
What do you think, Travis? Do you think?
I do not think that the truth about UFOs or this phenomenon, whatever you believe it to be, in any way necessarily contradicts religion.
I agree with you. It doesn't have
I think it'd have an impact on the economy.
Right. Right, because if they're saying you don't need oil anymore,
well, there's going to be a lot of differences.
Yeah. And here, like we said, you had the 3 spokesmen of the Vatican Observatory saying there's most likely life in space, and they're looking for it from 2 observatories. But it all depends on what the message is. If they come here and say, "Don't worry about it, we can cure your diseases and give you free energy," everybody's happy, right? If they come here and say, "Humans taste good,"
well, I mean, even Stephen Hawking has warned recently on numerous occasions about contact.
So that's our show, and this is the first episode from my estate here in Weston, PA. We will film other episodes here as we continue with the string theory of the unexplained. Thank you.